On November 29, 2013, one of the deadliest unspoken air disasters occurred. The Embraer E-190 twin-jet operating crashed into the Bobweta National Park in Namibia when it was halfway through its flight at around 11 a.m., killing all 27 passengers including a singer and 6 crew members on board. This crash could have saved hundreds of lives, and you will know why. This was a crash caused on purpose by the Captain Hermínio dos Santos Fernandes in an act of murder-suicide. The aircraft was 1 year old and had accumulated more than 2,900 flight hours in 1,900 flight cycles. The engines were last inspected the day before the crash. On the day of the crash, the aircraft had departed Maputo International Airport at 9:26 Coordinated Universal Time and was due to land at 1:10 p.m. at 4 de Fevereiro Airport in Angola. The crew comprised 2 pilots, 3 cabin attendants, and a technician. The captain, 49-year-old Hermínio dos Santos, had logged more than 9,000 flight hours in total, 2,519 hours of which were on the Embraer E-190. The first officer, 24-year-old Gracio Gregório Chimukile, had about 1,400 hours of flying experience, with 101 of them on the plane he crashed in. The flight was going well and peacefully, and the captain showed no sign of abnormality. Shortly after, at around 11:10 a.m., the co-pilot asked the captain to be dismissed while going to the restroom, to which he was granted permission. The co-pilot then left the cockpit and the door closed, and by default it locked, which is its normal state to avoid inconvenient access. Before continuing, you should first understand how cockpit door locks work. Before the event of 9/11, cockpit doors of most passenger aircraft were not very secure. They were designed to provide a quiet office environment for pilots. They hadn't thought about the possibility of there being hijackers. After 9/11, bulletproof and high-security cockpit doors became standard on commercial passenger aircrafts. This includes a switch that is controlled from inside the cockpit. As I mentioned earlier, the normal state of the door is locked. Outside the cockpit, there is a code pad used to notify the cockpit crew of a request for entry. Once the crew is notified, they can switch to unlock the door. In case of a suspicious act, the cockpit crew can switch to lock, keeping the code pad, the buzzer, and the cockpit access inhibited for 5 minutes. In case of an emergency, all crew members have a special access code that allows a cockpit door to be unlocked for 30 seconds, but this action can only be accomplished through the code pad, which is rendered useless when the switch is unlocked. This is presumably the only possible situation in the case of the E-190. After the co-pilot left the cockpit, 2 minutes passed before the captain decided to permanently lock the door. A further 1 minute passed before the captain initiated a descent. While cruising an altitude of 38,000 feet, that is 12,000 meters, at about 11:20 a.m. in Botswanan airspace, the captain changed the autopilot settings and set it to manual and began the descent. The plane was losing its altitude at a rate of 67 miles per hour, that is 108 kilometers per hour, during a heavy rainfall. The cockpit voice recorder captured sounds of the captain's input to the autopilot, several alarms going off during the rapid descent, as well as repeated loud bangs on the door from the 24-year-old co-pilot, who was locked out of the cockpit, followed by screams from passengers. After 6 minutes of losing altitude, the aircraft's track was lost from screen at 3,000 feet, 910 meters above sea level. The plane crashed at a speed of 348 miles per hour, equivalent to 560 kilometers per hour, into the Bobweta National Park in Namibia at around 11:30 a.m., the last time they had contact with the air traffic control. The impact completely destroyed the plane, tearing it into small debris, instantly killing all 33 people on board. The wreckages of the plane were found the next morning, with burned body parts scattered around everywhere, some burned beyond recognition. Among the victims in the passenger cabin were 10 Mozambicans, 9 Angolans, 5 Portuguese, 1 French, 1 Brazilian, and 1 Chinese. Among the confirmed victims were the Angolan hip-hop and R&B singer Action Nigga, who left a huge emptiness and mourn in the hearts of his people. Sakina Kasamo, a young program presenter on a private radio station in Maputo. 8-year-old Liza, who took her last picture with her 4-year-old sister Yumalai before boarding the plane with her 2-year-old brother Carlinhos and 30-year-old mother Jaina Sambo, a family that was going over to their aunt for their holidays, but their pictures were not provided in respect to their family. Still, among the victims were 4 Portuguese entrepreneurs and 1 former sporting handball player, 3 Angolan Ministry of Finance inspectors who had gone to Maputo capital to participate in an annual conference of Community of Portuguese Language Countries General Inspections. The French and Chinese victims were not identified. At first, it was speculated that the cause of the crash would have been the heavy rains and poor weather in the vicinity of the flight path. But about a month after the incident, upon investigation, it was reported that Captain Hermínio de Santos had a clear intention to crash the jet and manually changed its autopilot settings in order to take full control of the plane manually. But what could have taken him to resort to such a disastrous act? National Transportation Safety Board pilot psychologist Malcolm Brenner stated that during this period, the captain was probably thinking about life and contemplating whether he could carry out such an act, meaning he was depressed. As the captain showed no sign of health issues before boarding the plane, investigators had to go in search of his personal life. As it turned out, it was revealed that the pilot was facing family issues prior to the crash. His son died in a suspected suicide in November 2012, almost exactly a year before his own fate, which was only a few days after his son's 1-year death anniversary. He didn't go to the funeral for unclear reasons. On top of that, his daughter was in hospital undergoing heart surgery at the time of the crash, and his divorce proceedings had been unsolved for over a decade, leading to his depression. But this cannot explain him deciding to mercilessly take 32 innocent lives with him. I believe this crash reminds you of a similar disaster, the crash of Germanwings Flight 9525 that happened 16 months later, which could have been avoided if the LAM crash had gotten more attention and extensively covered by media. But sadly it wasn't, because the crash happened in and involving third world countries. This meant that the airline industry failed to apply safety measures in time to avoid the Germanwings Flight 9525 disaster, where in this case the captain was the one who was locked out of the cockpit by the first officer. It was only after this crash that a new policy was implemented, where if one pilot leaves the cockpit, one of the crew members has to stay in the cockpit with the pilot until the other pilot gets back. The 2013 LAM disaster was the second and last fatal crash in Mozambique aviation history, following the crash of a presidential aircraft that killed the first Mozambican president, Samora Machel, in October 19, 1986. I'm Mozambican and I bring you this from Mozambique. I don't usually make this kind of content, but I thought it could be worth something. If you're watching this, whether it's right after it was uploaded, 1, 5, or 10 years later, gotta let you know that I really appreciate your support, and hopefully someday may not only Mozambique but all third world countries get a decent recognition or attention, because sometimes the wealthy lose important warnings because they were carried by the poor. Have a good one and a happy new year.